Alright, this video is on how to make one of these little zippered bags, and I've made several variations of it. You can make it with fringe or without. You can add your logo. And I want to make this video as short as possible, so I'm not going to go into detail about warping your loom and all of that. You should already know how to use your peg loom. So today I'm using my 3D printed loom with the 3/16 inch pegs. I'm not sure if I've put the 3D files on Thingiverse yet for the 3/16 inch pegs, but I will. I'm going to use my wooden pegs today. Sometimes I use the 3D printed ones, but they're not very strong. So I'm going to test this out with my 3/16 inch dowels. So I'm going to prepare the loom. The way that I calculated for this bag, I placed my pre-made bag onto the loom and I added an extra peg on either side. And then I measured around the bag to determine how much cloth I need to cover the bag. So I came up with 12 inches to wrap around the bag. Then I added 6 inches for fringe, and then I call it take up, but it's really just extra warp that you need just to work with it. So I added a generous 12 inches to that. I came up with 30 inches for the total length of the warp, but since the warp is doubled, I need 60 inches for each peg. So I'm going to measure out my warp now and go ahead and warp my loom. And again, you need to already know how to do that. And just a quick tip, if your holes on your pegs are tiny, you can use a dental floss threader or a piece of heavy thread and just thread the ends in there and leave a loop to pull your yarn through those tiny holes. And I usually just put it on the loom and then I line up the ends so that they're even. I'm going to be using lease sticks and waste yarn at the beginning of my project and also waste yarn at the end of my project. So I have a whole video explaining the benefits of that and showing the results. So I'm not going to go into detail about that right now, but I do like to take my bundle of yarn here and tie it into a loose knot. You can do 2 or 3 bundles if you want to, but since my warp is not very wide, I'm just going to do one little bundle at the end, and that just kind of helps a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my lease sticks, and I'll just briefly say what they are. The first lease stick I go under over, and the second lease stick I'm going to go just the opposite, over under, and so they'll have both of those in there. So go and check out that video explaining what the purpose of the lease sticks are. I'm going to turn my loom around because I like to weave with my warp out behind the loom, and I'm going to weave in about 6 rows of waste yarn, 6 to 8 rows. For the seams on my bag, I'm just going to be doing a simple ladder stitch, and it gives you this little braided look on the edge. So for a ladder stitch, the stitches go straight through, so you don't need a lot of yarn left over. So I'm going to measure out about 3 times the width of this for my beginning before I start to weave. So I don't know if all that's showing on the camera, so I'm just going to give a generous 3 times, and then I'm going to start weaving. I'm not going to tie a knot or anything like that. So go ahead and weave your project for the length that you need to cover the bag. And when I measure at the loom, so every time I advance my warp when I think I have enough for the project, I will take the I'll take the little zippered bag at the back of my loom, and I'll pull up the cloth and make sure I have enough to wrap the bag. And I made mine really dense. I wanted the fabric firm, so when I packed in my weft, I packed it in really firmly. So when you measure, be sure you have it packed in pretty well. So go ahead and weave all the cloth that you need to cover your bag, and I'm starting on the left, so I want to end on the right. So when I get to the end of my weaving, I'm going to leave enough yarn on the right hand side for the seam for the opposite side of the bag. So I'll usually just tie this up in a little butterfly just so that it doesn't get in my way and I don't accidentally cut it or anything like that when I get ready to tie off. Alright, so I'm going to weave until I have enough cloth to cover my bag. I've woven enough cloth to cover my little bag, and I ended with my yarn on the right, and I cut enough to do a seam just like I did at the beginning. So I started on the left and ended on the right. So just end your weaving on the opposite end of where you started. Then I added 5 or 6 rows of waste yarn on top of my weaving. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling up enough warp on this end. I have quite a bit of warp left on the other end, but I need a foot or so on this end. So I'm going to try to do this with this tilted so you can see it. But I just pull up each peg and I pull it quite a bit so I can get enough yarn on this side, and I may have to do it across and then come back and do a little bit more. So just pull up enough yarn, at least a foot, so that you can tie off and then leave some for fringe. I spend quite a bit of time straightening out this cloth. It doesn't take that long, but I like to straighten out the warp strands, undo the knot at the beginning end of our warp, and then you can spend a little time just kind of combing this into place so that it's even across and it feels like it's the same thickness. You don't want it to be really packed in on one side and not the other. But once you tie off the ends, a lot of that can be worked back in. But I also double check to make sure I have enough cloth. And you can ease in a little bit more by loosening up the fabric, but I wouldn't do too much of that because you want this pretty dense. You can go ahead and take the least sticks out, and I just took the rubber band off of one side. So this is my yarn left over for my seam, and here's my waste yarn. So I want to go on the one end of the waste yarn that was attached to the peg or went around the peg, and you want to carefully clip just the waste yarn on one side. Just clip those loops, making sure you're not cutting. Always check before I snip to make sure I don't have any other of my warp or my weft caught in there. And then you can go on the opposite end and just grab those ends and put a little pressure on here and just pull them right out. They've done their job. I think I have a knot on that one, so I'm going to clip that knot. So everything is left nice and neat, and my weft from my project yarn looks really nice. Alright, so we're ready to tie off, and I like to start on the side that has the cut thread or the thread that or the yarn that I've left over for the seam, and I like to work from right to left or left to right depending on where this yarn is coming out. There's nothing wrong with you starting on the end that is not cut. This is just what I prefer. If I'm working from left to right, my left strand is going to be my worker, and I'm going to make the number 4 over the top of the the warp that's right next to it, a single strand. And then I'll take that tail and come up through that and make a little soft knot at the top. So if you're working from left to right, now again, this is just my way of doing it. I've seen it done a bunch of different ways. So I'll make the number 4 and then come up through the middle. So working from right to left, I do just the opposite. The rightmost piece of yarn is my worker, and it's going to cross over and make the letter P. It's going to cross over the left one and come up through the middle, and then just pull it up softly. Don't pull these tight because this starts getting crunchy here at the edge. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to take the next single strand. That's going to be the passive. This now is the new worker. The right over the left and then up through that loop, and softly but snugly even it out here so they all look nice and neat. I'm only going to go in one direction. You can go back and forth as many times as you want and make a little selvage for a placemat, but I'm just going to work the technique from right to left. Do it one more time. I'm crossing right over left and then putting a little tension on this yarn and then letting go that and leaving it out of the way. So I'm going to continue across, tying the rest of my row. Okay, locate your extra yarn here so that you don't cut it, and we can now cut this off of the loom. So I go up here close to the pegs and I just cut a single strand. You can just whack it right across the top if you want to, but I don't want to have to clean up all those little pieces. So if you just cut it up close to the pegs on just one of the strands, you'll be able to get it off, and you'll have enough yarn or enough warp to work with to tie off this end. Alright, now I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to tie this one on this end just like I did the opposite side. So I'm going to just make sure I know where everything is. I'm going to remove the waste yarn, and since my yarn is coming out on this side, I'm going to do my knots from right to left. If you want to, you can take this last weft row and pass it between these two at the end. It's not 100% necessary, but it does give this one something to tie onto. I did not do that on the other side because I just forgot. And again, it's not necessary, but this first knot is not really holding anything in place unless you do that. So, but once we get to this second one, and this one is tied to that one, then it is securing the weft. I like to use a yarn needle for this, and you need something that's blunt on the end so you don't split the yarn. You can use a crochet hook if you prefer, and I like to have something to measure with. So now that I've got this all tied, I'm going to be taking pairs of this fringe here and working it into the channel corresponding to the peg, you know, that it came out of. It's hard to explain that, but you're going to be doing these in pairs because these were the pairs that were on the same peg when we were weaving. So I'm just going to thread both of them onto my needle, and I'm going to decide how far down I want. I think about 1 inch is what I'm going to do. Pretty similar to what I did here. I came down about 1 inch. So you're just going to follow that little channel down, and my ruler is 1 inch wide, so I'm going to make sure I'm not going through to the other side, and just gently pull these through. You don't want to pull them too hard because it'll get scrunchy on the top, and then you can straighten all that out after you get it pulled down. So, and this is another opportunity to straighten out this top edge as you go. So let me do one more. I'll take the next pair, and I'm going to do this on the other end of my project also, making sure that the fringe is both on this top layer. And you don't want to weave in that long piece of thread that you left over to make your seam. I've probably said that too many times, but I've accidentally cut mine before, so you want to pay attention to where it is. Alright, so I can kind of work this in and neaten it up on the edge as I go. If you are going to be hiding your warp instead of making fringe, you're going to need to weave a little bit farther than what I'm doing here, and then you would just weave through to hide your the warp ends, and then just trim the end really close to the cloth. And this would be the inside of the bag, and none of those little fuzzies will show through that you're hiding in there, because sometimes when you trim these close, you're still going to get some little fuzzies. So that's just if you decide you don't want the fringe. Alright, I've already trimmed the other side, so I'm just placing a little small cutting mat here because I like to use a rotary cutter, and then I'll just comb this down. And my mat's not quite long enough to go all the way across, but I just take a rotary cutter and cut it to the same length as I did the other side, so I can see my lines through the yarn. And then I'll just slide this down. There we go. If you have a logo or a tag you want to put on your bag, it's a good idea to go ahead and do that now. Just fold your bag just as if it's going to be sewn, and that way you can get to the back. If you're using rivets to attach your tag, you'll need some sort of a backer to keep it from pulling through. The seam that I'm using, I call it a ladder stitch. Some people call it a mattress stitch. I really don't know what the technical term for it is, but I use it on a lot of things for knitting, crochet. You can use this technique on any kind of woven fabric that has the warp that goes continuously back and forth around the edges, and it makes a nice invisible seam. It also has a little bit of a braided look to it, because I went back and forth and I was grabbing three strands on one side and three on the other, so they started interlacing and caused this little braided look. So I really like that. So it's pretty easy to do. So since I left enough yarn to start with here, I don't have to tie a knot. If you don't have enough yarn for the seam, you can just cut another piece of yarn. It's not going to show, so you can just tie a knot on the inside and just start in one of these corners. So I'm going to take the yarn that's coming out here, and I'm just going to find that little knot on the other side just so I can join these together to get started. So this is just my setup here. So I'm going to be working back and forth, and I'm calling this the front and that the back. So wherever my yarn is coming out, see if I can zoom in just a little. Always keep track of where my yarn is coming out so I can go back across to the other side, and I'm going to grab the first three loops on the side here. So if you start off with 2 or 3, always do the same amount all the way across. I don't pull tight yet. I go 3 or 4 stitches before I pull tight, and that way you can always tell where you left off. So I know my yarn was here, so I'm going to grab the first 3 on this side, and we're putting our needle toward where we're going. So again, I'm not going to pull that tight just yet, so I can clearly see where I need to go when I get across to the other side. So I'm going to, where this yarn is coming out, I'm going to grab these loops on the side, and then just snug it up. I'm going to do one more stitch. I'm going to come back here to the front and grab the next 3 loops. And then now I can start pulling tight. Don't pull too tight. We just want to pull until the thread that you're sewing with disappears. And you see this little braided look starting to happen here. So only pull until that yarn disappears. Because if you pull too tight, this whole side gets pulled in. So when I get ready to start again, I'll kind of pull it out just so I can see where my yarn is coming out. And I'll grab the next 3. And back and forth all the way down to the other end. So now I'm going to the back, grabbing 3, coming around to the front, grabbing 3. Try not to miss any. Sometimes they get buried in there. So now that I've got 3 or 4 stitches on there, I'm just going to pinch right here so that I don't pull too tight, and just snug that up to where my yarn disappears in there. So try not to split the yarn, because if you start tugging on that and it's not moving, you'll know you've split the yarn, and you'll have to unthread your needle and go and pull the yarn out where you made the mistake. Don't leave it in there. So I'm going to continue all the way to the other end, and I'll be right back. When you've finished your seam, just poke your needle into the inside of the bag. And then just pooch it out to where you can see it, and just tie a couple of knots down here where it's coming out. Keep grabbing something I don't want to grab. And then I'm just going to run my yarn inside the bag, just kind of hide the tail, and I'll do that in a couple of different directions, back and forth, just to keep it from working its way back out again. And then you can go ahead and cut the yarn and sew up the other side of your bag. Alright, my bag is ready to put the lining in. I think I'm going to use this little pink one here. I was at Hobby Lobby today, and in the department where they have painting supplies for fabric, where they have caps and things like tote bags, things like that that you can decorate, they had these little zipper bags, these little canvas bags that are ready for dye sublimation and things like that. They were $1 a piece, so if you wanted to make something small and quick like this, they do have some options at Hobby Lobby. Alright, open up your bag and just tuck it into the thing, and if you've already put your logo on, you may want to pay attention to which way it unzips or zips. So for me, I think I'm going to put the zipper to where when it's open, the zipper tab is on the right. So whatever your preference is, do that. It won't matter if it's the same on both sides, but I do have a little tag on this side, so I wanted to pay attention to that. So make sure your zipper tab does not get down inside of here, because one time I sewed one of these and I sewed the zipper tab where I couldn't get to it, and I had to unsew part of the seam so that I could get it out. So what I want to do is match up my side seam to the side seam of the bag, and you can just use Wonder Clips to hold it in place, because when you get to that point you want to make sure those two places, the side seams, match up perfectly. And then just kind of ease everything in, and then I'm going to match up this other side with my side seam. Then I'm going to put a couple more clips to kind of line up the center so that things don't start getting skewed like that. So you really don't need that many clips. Just make sure that that you're not skewing the bag when you're sewing the zipper in. You're going to want to use a really sharp needle. For the yarn, we used a blunt needle to sew up the side seam, but you're going to want to use a really sharp, sturdy needle. I'm using just some heavy-duty thread that I bought at Hobby Lobby, and I'm using the color to match the zipper tape. They just used pink to sew that in there. If you're using yarn to sew this up, you're going to want to use a sharp tapestry, not a tapestry needle, but an upholstery needle, and with an eye large enough for your yarn to go through. So I've used yarn or thread, it doesn't matter, as long as it's a heavy thread that will hold up. So go ahead and get that ready. I'm going to cut some thread and tie a knot in the end of my thread. I'm only using a single strand of this. This thread tangles really badly, so I'm not starting off with a really long piece, so I can always rethread later. I don't want to start off right in the corner, but I'm going to start an inch or so away and work my way toward the corner. When I need to start sewing on the other side, I'm just going to travel my needle through this little bundle that they've got here. I'm going to bring my needle out the other side so I can continue on around the bag. But I'm just going to bury my knot up under the layers here and come out about 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper teeth, just so I can hide that knot up underneath there. And I'm just going to be doing a simple running stitch, and the thread gets buried down inside of the yarn so you don't even really see it. So I'm just going to hold that out of the way, and then I'm going to come on out from the inside of the bag toward the outside. And I want to catch whatever line you start sewing on, just be consistent all the way around. Close to the top, but just try to stay in a straight line all the way around. The thread does get buried, so you don't have to be super picky about that. So I'm just coming out and then going back into the inside. And just pull tight so that thread disappears. And then I'm coming back out again, going back to the inside, trying to catch some of that yarn as I go through. And you don't even see the thread. And then I'm at the corner already, so, well, I got one more stitch I need to go. I hope you can see this pretty well. So I'll go one more stitch close to the corner on the inside right there. And then I'll push my needle through that tape so I can get to the other side of the bag. And I'm going to continue doing a running stitch from the inside all the way around. I'm going to treat this corner the same way I did the other one, and then when you get to the end, just tie a knot and bury your knot between the layers, and you'll be finished sewing the lining into the bag. Alright, you may need to push these seams in to make it easier to get the zipper started, especially on the end with the zipper pull on it. So if you just kind of work it, you can get that started. And we are finished with our little bag. I hope you enjoyed the video.